however, it means that our ethics cannot be simple or unilateral. To that point, allow me to dwell on just 3 observations. 1, intra-religious ethics require language and concepts internal to our own religious traditions. Climate change is not a term that appears in Christian scriptures, and I suspect the same would be said in most scriptures. Therefore, the concerns raised by climate change must find a more natural and organic religious home if they are to have any meaning, or if they are meant to generate religious conviction. This is why environmental ethics can take multiple forms within Christianity, whether that is the language of stewardship or the language of loving the neighbor. And on this, the fastest way to offend people of religion, or people of faith, is to treat them as a means to an end. Which is to say that religions are not to be used for purposes external to religion, whether that is environmental, cultural, or political ends. This is the secular temptation, and this is, I sometimes worry, this is what the UN is trying to do. The UN has its goals, and it'll use religion to accomplish its own goals, whatever the religious tradition thinks about itself. And this is, so I refer to this as the secular temptation, and refusing this approach is a fundamental matter of human dignity. And this is a concept that echoes deeply across our own traditions. So, assuming the above, openness to interreligious ethics will again emerge organically within our own religious traditions. For those that believe all non-Christians are going to hell and therefore must be saved, there is very little room for interreligious ethics, except perhaps as a means to conversion. For those that believe all human beings are to be loved, accorded dignity, and created in the image of God, then interreligious ethics naturally grows out of the religious convictions that we are called to contribute to God's work in the world. Whether it is occurring in the world, and there are good scriptural examples to demonstrate that God is working in the world through all people and in all places and at all times, that even those that fall without or external to our religious traditions. So interreligious ethics, especially among those of us within the Abrahamic traditions, may not require a translation of our terms beyond their natural organic home in our religions, which is to say, we share a lot of language in common. The significant shared narratives between our religions means that frequently we intuitively understand what love, charity, dignity mean in our religious context. Certainly, we may not think they're identical, but we understand what we mean, and the family resemblance is similar. To my mind, this is why we often find that we share ethical convictions with very similar to those in other religious traditions, sometimes more easily than we share them with people internal to our own religions, which is to say that sometimes I think my ethics and Dickie's ethics are much more similar than my ethics and some other Christians that I'm friends with. And why is this? For example, there are times when, exactly right, and John MacArthur and I would not recognize our own ethical convictions, even though we both claim to be Christian. This is not because our primary language is climate change, but because our primary categories and language are rooted in our religious traditions themselves. In this sense, we are allies even before we are allied against environmental degradation. So, to engage the broader world, which frequently adopts secular or non-religious language and categories, we must recognize that we are speaking in translation, approximating our religious convictions within categories and terminology supplied by other traditions. This does not mean we're being unfaithful or losing our religion when we use the language of the secular world. So when we use the language of climate change, that doesn't mean we're being unfaithful. It means we're translating and we're adopting language that's not innate to our religious traditions. We are seeking to be faithful where we live and in a tradition that is embodied and in cultured reality. As mentioned earlier, climate change is one of those very pregnant scientific categories with loads of incredible assumptions built into it, and it dominates much of our world today. And it's a category, it engages categories, about which many of our religions care very deeply. As people of faith, we must be self-conscious about our engagement so that we don't simply give up our faith by accident in the process. And one way to test this is to pretend you're a 5-year-old. So when I teach my undergrads, inevitably I ask them at some point in class why they're going to college. And they'll say, to get an education. And I'll ask them, so why are you getting an education? And they'll say, because I want to get a job. And I'll say, so why do you want to get a job? And they say, because I want to make money. And then I'll say, so why do you want to make money? And they'll say, I'm not sure, but I think I need stuff in this life. And then you ask them, so why do you need stuff in this life? And then it gets even more complicated and a lot more uncomfortable. Because the reasons we do things are often intuitive at bottom and tied to our religious convictions. And the further we ask these questions and the further we press our questions, the more we get down to the things that matter very much to us, but we're often uncomfortable to say and often haven't thought about near enough. That's where I want to push our conversation about this. So why do we care about climate change? Is it purely self-interest in the human existence? It can't be, because the world existed before humans did, and if all humans died, it would still exist. On its own terms, it might be better for the earth sometimes if humans just died out. I'm not saying we should do that. I'm just saying, one could make that argument. So why? Why do we care about climate change? Often that has to do with how we relate to other people and our care and concern for creation as we understand it through our religious traditions. That's where we have things to say to one another, and we can share in interreligious context that don't always make a lot of sense outside of our religious traditions. This is why Interfaith Power and Power and Light work. This is why Interfaith Oceans works. This is why the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development works. And this is why the work that many of you have been working on Pasantrans, eco-Pasantrans or eco-friendly Pasantrans, that's why this works. And that's why the Faith Pavilion works. Not because it's going to accomplish UN goals, but because these goals are internal to these own traditions. So I want to step back for a moment and just offer a couple of concluding comments. What I've refused to provide this morning, and I hope no one was expecting it, but what I've refused to provide is a ringing endorsement of religion to solve these problems, whether it's Christianity or any other religious tradition. That simply alone is not going to solve this problem. Rather, I have attempted to illustrate why that claim is very difficult to prove, given that our religions have led us to this point in history. Again, that is the bad news. So is there good news? Well, I think there is. But it is difficult and will take a lot of work. More work than it took to get here. And what I have tried to demonstrate is that people of faith are engaged in two dialogues at the same time. First, intra-religious debates and dialogues, and then secondly, inter-religious debates and dialogues. Speaking intra-religiously, Christianity is deeply divided about the importance of climate change. Some voice their resistance, but the real problem is the many more that simply live out that resistance in their everyday pursuit of the benefits of colonialism and extractive capitalism. Nobody wants to say out loud that that's what we love, but we love the fruits of those things. This is a challenge that we are wrestling with daily on many levels. And from what I can see, Islam is not that different in many parts of the world. This is a dialogue that must be pursued by the language, concepts, and goals within each of our traditions. Self-interest, selfishness, does not rule either of our religious traditions, whether you're Christian or Muslim. Yet, in many ways, it rules our behaviors. So speaking interreligiously, we have much to learn from each other, and we have much that we can do to support one another. I don't think it is helpful for me to imagine that Christians ought to tell Muslims how to live ethically. But I do think that we in Christianity have made enough mistakes, and maybe we have on occasion got a few things right, that we may be able to help Muslims see similar tendencies within their own tradition in a way that may help all of us move forward together. And this would apply in the other direction as well. And because we are necessarily tied together by the causes and effects of climate change, we really have no choice but to pool our resources as much as we can to engage the challenges we face. At Baylor, this is the direction we are moving. We have a strong environmental sciences department, a strong biology department, we have a young environmental humanities program, and our public health and social work departments are deeply concerned with the population effects of climate change. I am here today because, being fully aware of the colonial past of many Christian countries and institutions, we know that we do not have all the answers and that we need to learn from one another and work together in institutions and among individuals of other faiths if we are to be faithful to our own convictions. To that end, I am grateful for the invitation to be here, and I hope and expect that it is the beginning of a long and fruitful journey together. Thank you very much.
All right, so from secular myopia to secular temptations, Paul, yeah? Of course, we do share the idea and notion of the stewardship of the earth. Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa, yeah? That verily I will make the steward of the earth. But of course, what does being a steward of the earth mean? And of course, this has a lot of definitions and problems of its own. You know, some people would say that this is increasing the problem of anthropocentrism, that man is essentially the center of creation, and therefore all creation was made for the humankind. And of course, some of these theological discussions and debates need to be further elaborated, perhaps later on in the discussion. Thirdly, of course, climate change is not something which is given. I mean, the president-elect of the United States feels that the climate is changing, but there is no such thing as climate change. Right? So these are two different categories which have two different consequences and implications in terms of policies. Because if you look at the geological time, the thousands of years of the planet's existence, you find that we are currently moving up the ladder in terms of the climate of the planet. But yet, is that climate change? Or is the climate simply changing because of the geological time? Because of the time in which we are in today. So thank you very much, Professor Paul Martins, for that. Now, our next speaker is Professor Emeritus Dato Azizan Binti Baharuddin. She received her Bachelor's of Science in Biology from the University of Tasmania, Australia, and a Master's of Science from the University College, London, and then a PhD in Philosophy of Science, Science and Islam from University of Lancaster in United Kingdom. She specializes in several areas, such as the environmental ethics, religion and sustainable development, Islam and science, bioethics, interfaith, intercivilizational dialogue. She has published more than 200 books, book chapters, monographs, journal articles, and newspaper articles. One of her foremost books include Islam and Ecology, Environmental Ethics in Islam, and Harmony Between Religion and Science. So Professor Azizan will be joining us via Zoom, hopefully. So if you can just start the Zoom. Professor Dr. Azizan, the floor is yours. Professor Azizam, I'm sorry, but we are having some technical difficulties here. Can you just wait for a while we test the equipment here so that we can listen to your presentation? Just 1 minute. Can you test your microphone, please? Test? Can you test? We're not hearing you. Test, test.
Respected fellow speakers, participants, good morning. Wabarakatuh. Very glad and happy
Bisa dibantu lagi?
for being invited. So thank you so much to Dr. Paul Martin for sharing with us like your father, and I think we are here to just learn from each other, and certainly I learned so much from your presentation. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so we will try very much or very hard in the time given to define slightly what is Al-Mizan, because the topic given to me is regarding Al-Mizan and its relationship to Islamic view on environmental ethics and what is the scope of Al-Mizan. So, believe it or not, yeah, it touches upon the Anthropocene, the current realities, the role of religion in Islam and also in other religions, and then the fact that what is presented in the Al-Mizan is actually among some groups already agreed upon by other religious traditions or members or some members of other religious traditions as well. And I think with my background in science, the harmonization of science or knowledge regarding climate change and spiritual values and our worldly endeavors in the fields of economics and others have a great deal to in helping us to because the word mizan basically means balance, and when we talk about balance we mean it in the physical aspect and also in the spiritual sense. And bottom line, philosophy speaking, we need a change in our worldview, and then of course what are words without deeds, so we'll be talking a little bit about our call to action. Next. So meaning of the term mizan is balance. So you can see in the slide the balance machine or the what you call it, I forgot what you call it, the balancing of rights and wrongs, balancing of the systems in the ecosystem that are now seemingly undergoing imbalance. So what is the source of inspiration of Mizan? It is from the whole of Islamic theological foundations, of course, but in particular it comes from one surah in the Quran, which is Surah Ar-Rahman, wherein the word Mizan is particularly spelled out. And in that surah, about 33 times, the ayat that says, and which of God's ni'mat or gift to you have you sort of forsaken or have you denied. So it is a very strong reminder of how we have not used or utilized what God has given us in the right way. And then if you want to understand, you also need to delve a little bit into the background and development of the document. It took 4 years in the making, and it went through several processes, but most typical in the Islamic tradition, it has to go through the censorship, if you like, by the Council of Elders, the most senior Islamic theologians in the world. The aims and objectives of the document, seriously, simply put, is to relearn what it is in the Islamic tradition that actually can inform us about our behavior and thinking vis-a-vis the environment today, and how we can move forward in at least mitigating. I agree with Dr. Paul, lots of people are quite gloomy, quite pessimistic about whether we can overcome the issues or not, but that rests entirely upon the moral stance of the religious adherents. So we are not here to judge, we are not here to point fingers. We are here as co-religionists who are interested in seeing how our faith traditions can bring us together to move forward to find solutions. So whether or not we actually succeed in the end, that's not up to us to say. Being spiritually, I hope, enlightened people, we leave that in the future to put in the hands of Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala. But for here and now, what do we do? What actually are we saying and what are we doing? This is the most critical points for me personally, and I think in the groups that I work with, this is also the view. So environmental ethics basically is the discipline in philosophy. You want to speak to secular people who don't believe in a religion. So we are saying that there is a kind of ethics vis-a-vis the environment, which talks about the moral relationship of human beings, not only to each other but also to the environment. That the environment has value and moral status, and this includes all of its non-human contents. So this is part of the so-called Tawhidic worldview of Muslims, which I hope we can touch further later on. And then just very quickly putting this in, there is a resonance with the current development philosophy in Malaysia. What Al-Mizan is saying is actually you can find resonance and agreements with the way that the country thinks it will try to develop in the next coming years. Next. So I was asked by Dr. Fakruddin, thank you so much, Pak, for inviting me in, to put Al-Mizan or talk about Al-Mizan in the context of, in the bigger context, in the interreligious context. So I always bring everybody back to the Charter. And I know Dr. Paul just said that some people, the UN, maybe perhaps use religions to their ends. So I'm not too sure about that. For me, whatever is put on our plate, it's our duty from our own perspective, from our own backgrounds, to study it and see whether it jives with what we're trying to do, with what we're thinking and feeling. So for me, you talk about 194 or more countries of the world. We do not know what is their stance, even though 80% of the world's population says that they have religion. But climate science, environmental science is showing to us that we actually stand at a critical moment in Earth's history, at a time when our future needs to be looked at, and the spirit of human solidarity and kinship with all life should be strengthened if we live with reverence for the mystery of being. So this word mystery is not a totally materialistic and secular word. It has to be unpacked, it has to be demystified. But I think for religious people, the mystery of being is opening the door to our bringing in our spiritual values. So we need to have gratitude for the gift of life, we've said this before, and also we need to be humble regarding the human nature. So we urgently need a shared vision of basic values to provide an ethical foundation for the emerging world community. And for me, after studying the Al-Mizan, after being involved with it in a very humble way, together with all the other bigger thinkers in the field, so Al-Mizan for me is a kind of Muslim response to the Earth Charter. And the Earth Charter, by the way, was promulgated in the year 2000, if I'm not mistaken. Next. Yeah, and also I take notes of what was spoken about at the Stockholm meeting in 1972, and also Stockholm Cluster in June 2022. If you look at the two interfaith statements, you can see that there is a kind of agreement amongst people of faith that we need to actually commit ourselves to caring for ecological justice and for protecting our one earth, and statements were made to this end as typical of any declaration. So by saying and sharing all these things, I hope that those of us in the audience who don't particularly belong to any faith groups can join the ranks of the so-called religious adherents in this pursuit of restoring the balance of the earth. which is a bold kind of initiative to make the whole of the development plan of the nation and all the sectors of development in the nation actually follow through certain guidelines vis-a-vis mitigating and trying to reduce the effect of climate change. And we may refer to psychologists and experts in human behavior, but basically this the one that I share with you on the screen sort of tells us the various stages of changes of behavior. The pre-contemplation stage, the contemplation, and then the preparation, and then the action, the maintenance of the action, and then we of course, being normal human beings, will relapse into our old habits again. So again, cynicism can be the order of the day, but seriously, we feel that that we can't accept that. We just have to keep moving, and we say that out of an earnest desire and what we have in terms of spiritual values, and we try to implore others to see our point of view, but if they don't, that's okay. It doesn't hurt. Next. Yeah, as Alvin Toffler says, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And what is it that we have to learn? We have to learn climate science, climate issues, and then what is it that we have to unlearn? We have to learn the bad habits, if you like, the behavior, the economic systems, the extreme capitalism, the disdain for looking at the poor, the concern that there is a rising gap between rich and poor. Because if you look at the world today, the gap, despite the sustainable development goals, the gap between rich and poor widens every day. We have to unlearn our habits in overconsumption, for example. Relearn. What is it that we have to relearn? We have to relearn. This is what the Al-Mizan is trying to do. What our religion says vis-a-vis what we can do to change. Whether or not we are successful or totally halfway successful, we can't say that now. But the difficult thing is we have to do something. Next. And as we all know, in environmental ethics narrative, the experts are talking about two types of dominant worldview. More dominant one, the man-centered, which sees man as the measure of everything, and by its reason alone he can know and solve everything, and resources are infinite. Other species are of utilitarian value only, and this worldview is always often seen to be in synchrony with materialism. But that another worldview, and you can say that the people who love the environment, who fight to maintain the environment, are saying that man is not the measure of everything, and reason needs to be aided by mutilation or values, and resources are finite, and limits do exist, and the material dimension is should be balanced with the spiritual dimension, and all this brings us to the view that there should be ethics that govern our behavior, and worldview is the basis of the ethics, and worldview generally is collection of our knowledge, attitudes, values, beliefs about the world around us, and we should inform our thoughts and actions. Next. So as a Muslim, we worked on this project for the past 30 years, 30 years over. So we try to see the latest narrative about saving the world. So whether or not we think that this is useful, but for us, your honest, your intellectual honesty, your spiritual honesty in looking at this, it's something to be supported. I think something to be celebrated. So if it doesn't work for some people, that's okay. But for a lot of people, it seems to make sense. So basically, for Muslims, we have three types of relationship man and man and his creator, and man and the environment. And these three should be in harmony with one another, and they coexist with one another. And you may have heard of the word Sharia, which is the religious law as stated in the Quran. So the protections, you can elaborate them further. And if you look at it, religious studies curriculum, I suspect more needs to be inputted in terms.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. Test. Test. Thank you very much, Professor Azizan, for your elaboration on the Al-Mizan. Can I have the speakers back in front, please? And thank you very much for describing to us and elaborating on this project on Al-Mizan, or on the sort of cosmic equilibrium. And also a reminder that we should now focus or migrate from human-centered development to more of life-centered development, and also this fixation from fiqh or sharia to maqasid al-sharia, or the principal objectives of the sharia. And you talked also about doomsday, or what I would call the extreme state of unsustainability. You know, there's this beautiful hadith which says that if you are holding a sapling in your hand and you see judgment day coming, so keep on planting. So thank you very much, Professor Azizan. So I would like now to invite Professor Aim to the stage, and I'd just like to read her CV just a little bit. As I had mentioned, that she graduated from Iowa State University in 2019. Her dissertation was on the politics of women's health, decentralization, state capacity, and maternal mortality disparities. She got her MA in sociology from Birmingham University, but also MA in interdisciplinary Islamic studies from UIN Sharif Hidayatullah. Now she is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology in the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences in Sharif Hidayatullah Islamic University, and also a visiting fellow in the Regional Social and Cultural Studies program at ICS in Yusof Ishaq Institute in Singapore. So Professor Ian, I give you the floor.
Yep, thank you so much for this opportunity, Pak Fahrudin, for inviting me for this event. So slightly different with the previous presenter that focused more on the ethics. So my presentation today will focus more on empirical data. So this is part of the bigger project that our center are doing. You know, it's called Religious Environmentalism Action. Well, we call it REACT. So we have several series of research, and the one that I'm going to present, this is only small part of the research. So the title of my presentation is Green Islam and Climate Change in Indonesia. So next please. So move to the background why this study initiated. It's because we see the growing number of initiative from religious group to concern on the issue of environment, or some people may call it as religious environmentalism increasing in Indonesia, and some may call this religious environmentalism as Islamic environmentalism or Muslim environmentalism, but in our term we call it as a green Islam. It's growing. And based on several studies that has been done on the issues of Islamic environmentalism, most of them focus more on certain cases, like one or two cases, but in our project we try to looking at in more broader context. And what is the missing from those studies is because some of the study do not specifically, even though this movement concern on the issues of environment, so what is missing is to some extent this movement focus on the climate change. Next please. So for my presentation today, I will address two questions. First is, why do some green Islam movement in Indonesia focus on climate change, while other address other environmental issues, and how does religion shape the environmental ethic or green Islam movement and Muslim concern? So my presentation is combination between the movement and also Muslim population in Indonesia in general. Next please. So for my presentation, I use the framework from the social movement theory. Especially, there is a shift from a new social movement that focus only on certain regional movement into more transnational social movement. And the issues of climate change, we can consider that as a you can say it's a global, transnational issues, but then adapted to a more local and national context, like in the context of Indonesia. And from this perspective, I also will use several framing theory on how the frame alignment process happening among this movement, and also frame diffusion from international or transnational issues into more localized and national context of climate change in Indonesia. Next, please. So as I mentioned before, that this is a small part of our big project of REACT. So for this presentation, I use several data. I mixed up between qualitative and quantitative ones. So the qualitative one, we do a desk research with 192 religious environmentalism or religious environmental groups in Indonesia, and 142 of them are Islamic organization, or we call it Green Islam group. And then we also conducted 50 FGD with 50 figures, and also we conduct interviews with many of the informants from these groups, and we also conducted observation with several community of Green Islam all over Indonesia. And for the quantitative, we did a survey for national survey with 3,397 respondents, but for this presentation, I only use like 3,045 Muslims. So my presentation will focus on Muslim only this time. Okay, next please. So in this presentation, I use the concept of what so-called as Green Islam movement as a collective effort or action using the principle of Islamic teaching to protect environment. So what people do inspire them to protect the environment driven by the Islamic ethic or Islamic values. And the Green Islam movement in my presentation will cover some example are those based on mass organization in Indonesia, like LPBI-NU, Muhammadiyah, and other organizations affiliated to Islamic organizations or certain religious community, and some of them also based on non-governmental organizations. Next, please. So maybe I will start with the overview of what are the characteristic and typology of the green movement in Indonesia. Next, please. So this is the distribution of our data. So as I mentioned before, from the data that we collected, there are 192 faith-based environmental movement in Indonesia, and 142 among them are focused on are based on Islamic organization or community. And among this group or among this movement, 88% of them are local based, and 11 of them work in the national level, and only 1% have more broader scope in international scale. Next, please. And in terms of affiliations, some of them, like 68% affiliated to certain Islamic religious group in Indonesia, and like the rest, like 32%, they are more independent. And in terms of the affiliation, 70% of them affiliated to Muhammadiyah, one of the mass Islamic organization in Indonesia, and then 24% affiliated to Nahdlatul Ulama, and the rest affiliated to other Islamic groups. And in terms of forms, some of this green movement, they form a community, 4%, and 1% are coalition, and 21% are NGOs, and the rest, like 75%, are based on Islamic organization in Indonesia, especially Muhammadiyah and NU. Next, please. And then the typology of Green Islam in Indonesia based on what they are doing, even though some of this movement may focus on several issues, but we see the tendencies of this movement, like 77% of them focus more on as a policy campaigner, 18% on as a mobilizer, and 6% on conservationists. Next, please. And this is in terms of the membership. In terms of the membership, 68% of this Green Islam movement are common people. There is no age limitations, but then 18% of them also part of the young generations. And also some of the Green movement also focus on only a religious figure or religious leaders, is only 1%. And some of this movement also led by women. Among of them is 12% of this Green movement led by or organized by women, Islamic women in Muslim women in Indonesia. And in terms of leaderships, most of this movement, like I mentioned before, only small portion led by women, only 23%, and the rest, like 70%, led by male. And then this movement also focus on the issues of energy transitions, like only 12% of them focus on this new issue, but the rest did not really focus attention on energy. So my next question is, how about climate change? Whether do they really focus on the issues of climate change, or they only focus on other environmental issues, even though we can say that various environmental problems can lead or contribute to the issues of climate change. But we specifically focus on how this movement use the term climate change, climate crisis, or climate justice in their campaign, in their website, or in their activities. This one, next please. This one is a network between those movements. So you could see here that the biggest organization, as I mentioned, that based on Muhammadiyah, and the second one NU, and the rest is smaller. There is connection and network between this religious environmental group, but only small portion of this movement, they work alone and don't have any connection or network with other Green Islam movement. Next, please. Now let's move on to the main question of, do they focus on climate change? Next, please. This is also based on our data that among 152 Green Islam movement, only 41.13% focus on the issues of climate change. But the rest, like 58 of them, still not really focusing on the issues of climate change, but on other environmental issues like waste, like specific, even though I said waste can also contribute to climate change, or deforestation can contribute to climate change, but they do not use the term climate change in their advocacy or in their campaign. Next, based on the affiliations, you could see here that the most of Green Islam that focus on climate change in terms of the affiliation, you could see again Muhammadiyah, like 58% of among the Muhammadiyah among Green Islam movement affiliated to Muhammadiyah, 58 of them focus on the issues of climate change. While among NU Islamic Green Islam movement among NU group, only 21% of them focus on climate change. So if we compare between between Green Islam movement that focus on climate change, the proportion of Muhammadiyah is the highest, like 66%, while NU only 8.3% of them focus on the issues of climate change. And this is also the profile of whether they focus on campaign. Most of the Green Islam that focus on climate change. Next, please. Sorry. Yeah, most of the Green Islam movement focus on climate change. They tend to use the strategy as a policy campaigner. So rather than using the term like climate justice or climate crisis, most of this Green Islam movement focus more on the term climate change, which some scholars mentioned that this is more natural, more natural rather than more radical one like climate justice and climate crisis. Next, please. And in terms of scope, as I mentioned before, that even though the issues of climate change is a global issue, but then transform into local issue, you could see here that many Green Islam that focus on the local scope, they tend to adopt, or they also embrace the term of climate change in their movements. So around 86% of them focus on the issues of climate change. Next, please. And my next question is why? Why do some Green Islam movement focus on climate change while other focus only on other environmental issues? So using the social movement net theory, I said that because there is a diffusion of frame process from the global context to the national context. And if you could see, there is a Paris Agreement in 2015, and also among the Muslim country, there is Islamic Declaration on Global Climate Change in Istanbul 2015. That was the critical juncture that changed or shift the focus of Green Islam movement, because the initially Islamic Green movement focused on disaster and humanitarian action. But then after the Istanbul declarations focusing on climate change, that global context diffused to, especially at that time, focus on more leading figures or Islamic figures in their country and in Indonesia, like Pak Fakhruddin, I think, also part of this event. So that's part of the hierarchical division where the transnational or global politics or global context of climate change diffuse to more localized or national context like Indonesia. And that time, the transition or the shift from disaster action to climate change began. And in the local or national context, then this movement or this Green Islam movement also tried to use, to adopt the process of frame alignment, in which they're bridging the issue that they initially focus on with other issues, including climate change. For example, if you talk about climate change like Kader Hijau Muhammadiyah or FNK-SDA, they focus on land grabbing, inequality, but then they bridge that issue with the issues of climate change. So this is one of the strategy how they adopt the transnational issues of climate change, but align them with the local context, social and political context in Indonesia. And also, some of them also extending the scope. Some of them, for example, only focus on deforestation, but then they realize that the issues of deforestation can also contribute to the issues of climate change. So that's why they're extending the scope of the issues of the movement. So this is one of explanation of why some Green Islam transform or expanding their scope into climate change. And also, this is also, next please. In the aspect of among religious group, there is also conversation or discussion regarding the dichotomy of the concept of bi'ah among religious community and the Green Islam in Indonesia. For example, Ulil Absar Abdallah that we invited in our event previously, he mentioned that there is dichotomy, that al-bi'ah or environment in Indonesia, there are two levels, bi'ah as-sughra and then bi'ah al-kubra. Bi'ah as-sughra is something that's small, it's not problematic, whereas something small, environmental destruction is something that's small, and it's okay for Islamic movement or Islamic Green movement to focus on this small habitat. But for al-bi'ah al-kubra, like climate change, is problematic, because climate change, it's still debatable in the context of global, and he considered, for example, as a cultural war. So that's why this concept, the dichotomy, the division or separation between al-bi'ah al-sughra and al-bi'ah al-kubra can be in my perspective, can be an obstacle of why certain green movement only focus on small habitat or only focus on small issues of environment rather than expanding their scope to a more global context like climate change. Next. And this is the example of how, this is the survey that I mentioned before, so in the context of Muslim community as well, not in terms of a movement, in terms of Muslim community, most of Muslim community consider that waste is the most critical problem to the society because it's easier to see, it's around you, so that's why they think this is the most critical one, while the climate change is the second, but not the priority. And why waste is more important for public is because you could see everywhere, so it's closer to you. So it's also easier for the movement to focus on certain issue that can easily be addressed directly, rather than maybe climate change is too complex for some certain people. How to understand the term climate change itself is already difficult. Next, please. And this is to address my last questions. Also, this is based on our survey on Muslim Muslim population. So, to show how religion shaped the environmental ethics on climate change, I use on the left side, I use the measurement of human and nature. It's also developed by Prof. Whitson from ICRS. But with this measurement, we correlate it with the concern of Muslim on climate change. And you could see here, the red one is for those who concern on climate change, while the blue one for those who do not concern on climate change. So based on the human and nature relationship here, human beings who have more ethic view that consider the relationship between human and nature as a participant, or as a human is a steward, or as a partner to the environment, they are more likely to be concerned with the climate change rather than those who do not really they do not really consider themselves as a participant or steward or partner to the environment. And here, in terms of human as a master, or people always consider that Anthropocene perspective, anthropo perspective, there's no significant difference whether they concern or not concerned on the issues of environment. And other religious aspect that I want to highlight here, it's also maybe confirming Paul's presentation there, that although some religion encourage people to do a good thing to the environment, but in reality it's very complex. Like in this case, we use the measurement of conservatism. So individuals or Muslims who have more tendency of conservatism in terms of theology and in terms of political leadership, they're expecting that somebody with the same religious background as the leader in their country, in the region, and etc., they tend to have more they tend to less concern on the environment. So this is show how the complexity of the role of religion, maybe to some extent they can encourage and promote and shaping the individual behavior to the environment and climate change, but on the other side also the perspective of religion may also hinder them to be concerned on the issues of environment and climate change. I think I don't have to conclude anything. I think I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Halimatus Sa'diyah, sorry. And thank you very much for elaborating on the research findings. And I can see some of the gaps and discrepancies between the more sort of traditional, conservative, and modernist, progressive Muslim movements. We could also see from the data the gender discrepancy and also the sort of minor, major agenda on climate issues, and also the local, national, global issues. There is one thing though, one of the things I mentioned at the Faith Pavilion was on this reflection I have on the ABC model, which is the attitudinal behavioral change model. Because it seems like if you look at the conservation efforts, some ideas about sustainability and doing something about climate change, but then there is also limitations in terms of the actions, the behaviors, and habits. So maybe we can delve into that much more in more private conversation. So with that, I would like to open up a discussion for if you have any issues, questions, or remarks you'd like to make to any one of the presenters or two of the presenters. We have 2 microphones here, so if you'd like to just raise your hands, please, for any questions. I'll give 3 people. Okay, 1. Who else? You can pose your question in Bahasa Indonesia or English or Arabic or whatever language you want. Okay, 1. Who else? Okay, just 1 first. Mike, do you mind giving the mic to her? Please state your name and affiliation.
Test.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for the chance. My name is Felicia Zahra Putri Manopo. I am a student. I'm majoring in international relation. I would like to ask a question for Dr. Paul Martins and Professor Iim. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name. In Dr. Paul's presentation, you emphasized the importance of interfaith dialogue in addressing climate change, while Professor Iim discusses how faith communities participate in the climate change crisis. So I wonder, in both of your opinions specifically, what strategies can be employed to bridge diverse theological perspective on environmental stewardship? And other than that, how can faith communities collectively mobilize their resources and influence to advocate for sustainable practices and policies that address the climate crisis effectively? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Zara. Any other questions? Comments? Yes. Dr. Rudy.
Thank you. I enjoy these conversations. I just want to ask Paul regarding the historical roots of our ecology crisis. I read this article in, I think, 1980s, and it blasts now, and up to now still debating on religion's role on the anthropogenic and anthropocene's structure. You mentioned regarding the Christianity influence, and at the sentence, the narrative of the article, I see Lynn White was also mentioned Islam, but he say Islam is Judeo-Christian heresy. I would like to comment in U.S. now, perhaps any perspectives on Islam up to now with 1.8 million people followers, different than in 1960s. Maybe, what is your perspective?
Okay, can we have one more question? Yes, please do, Ibu. Name and affiliation, please.
Better I speak in bahasa.
Sure, no problem.
Ya, kami hadir berdua, Pak. Kebetulan Romo Martin Jinarut dari Bishop Conference of Indonesia. Maybe Romo Martin can introduce later after I speak here. And then, satu, memang terima kasih for the invitation. So we are proud of you all, Professor Iim and the other speaker. But hopefully, we can work and work together to save our planet. Before, we have already cooperation with Dr. Farudin in Faith and Water Project. But better maybe next we can work together also. That's why I come here to present our religion, Catholic. Thank you.
Thank you. Romo, would you like to add anything? Please.
Here, come.
Tambahkan, Romo.
It was I'm very special, and I'm sorry, I first time to follow this discussion, so I have no comment for this material. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure Professor Paul Martins would be able to respond to some of these questions. Please, Paul.
Well, thank you. That's a series of wonderful questions, and as there's several things that Professor Azizan noted that deserve further comment as well. But let me begin with the historical roots comment. Look, I think to be honest, to much of Christian scholarship pre-1980, 1970, most Christians talked as if Islam was a kind of heretical form of Christianity. I think that's a historical reality that we would like to leave in the past, but there is a sense in which that's a reality that should be acknowledged. I take the Historical Roots article to be the uniqueness about Christianity that's the deep problem, is that Christians are separate from nature and are called to dominate nature, or at least be responsible for nature, which then becomes the language of domination because of the King James Version of the Bible, and that's the term that's used. And the problem with, and Christianity has a long legacy of repressing indigenous religions, and religions that threaten the separation between God and the world. And so what Lynn White names is a Christian attitude that separates Christians from the earth, or separates people from the earth, and aligns them more with God as creator, and aligns us with being able to use the earth for whatever means we think appropriate. So that's where the Christian problem lies. And he responds by saying, St. Francis is right. We need to be friends with the earth. And there are trajectories in Christianity that are much stronger in that respect. There's lots of debate about that, with the historical accuracy of White's argument, but at a popular level, it's still probably right. This gets to the question of the relationship between religions and science. Yeah, historically, in the last couple of centuries, there's been a bit of a problematic relationship between science and religion, but it hasn't always been like that. And the medieval world was, I mean, the best science was done by people of faith, whether they were Islamic or Christian. So the science versus religion is a new phenomenon, historically speaking. And I think, and that's all to say, I am in no way opposed to what science has to say, and I think there has to be a deep dependence and a deep relationship and a conversation between the two. The difficulty is that science can only tell us what is. It's not in science that we get the language of justice or what we should do for one another. Now, science can tell us if we want to stop X, we can do Y, but it doesn't give us a reason why we should stop X. So why should we stop producing, say, carbon dioxide? Well, science can't tell us why. It can just say, well, this is the consequence of producing more carbon dioxide or whatever else whatever else we're polluting. Well, we're producing lots of things, but let's let that be the language we use. That's where we, as people of faith, can't give in to the conversation and simply accept, well, we need to stop X. We, as the issue for people, is never the knowledge. We know what we should be doing in almost all parts of our life. It's not, when we do bad things, it's not because we know we shouldn't do them. We do them because we have desires or wills that override our knowledge. And that's where I think our biggest issue is, and that's the issue that religions speak to, our ultimate desires, the way in which we shape our desires relative to one another. And so when we talk about our communities, how can we maximize our resources of our communities, what I'd say is something like this. The primary issue isn't to inform people, although sometimes it is. The primary issue is to create communities that shape people in particular ways, which tendencies towards particular ways of being. So to have communities, I think to maximize the resources, is to develop communities both families and then local communities and communities of faith, where people emerge with a deep concern for one another as part of their habits, virtuous, and to use that sort of language, rather than the ways in which all of us are shaped in many ways by the economic exchange that drives almost all of our lives. We're shaped by maximizing our return for our investment. That's the school we all go to every day. And that's the school that leads to, no matter what else we think, leads to desires that lead us down this path towards ecological destruction. And so that's where I don't have any animosity towards the scientific community or the UN. In many ways, the UN helps us to see the things that we should have seen in the first place. But I think as religious traditions, we have the resources, both historically and in the present, to address these things in ways that neither the economy or the UN have. So that's already way more than I wanted to say, but I hope that begins to answer.
Thank you. I'd just like to add, but I'll defer my comments later on after Professor A.M.'s answer.
Okay, maybe my answer lies on, so even though there has been many effort among a faith community to focus on the issues of environment, but there's still, of course, a challenge. And one of the findings in our study also, the challenges facing this movement are because they are still fragmented. Some of them focus more on certain area or certain issues, and they work in a small scale, and they do not have like more collaborative works, cooperation with other groups. So I think coordinations and also collaboration among this faith community is very important to enhance or to increase the impact of these movements. Like Paul also mentioned about interreligious ethics can be established through intra-religious ethics. So among Green Islam movement, for example, among this Green Islam movement is also important to work together. Like, for example, they only focus on their own constituents. Like Muhammadiyah, they might focus on the Muhammadiyah members, or NU, they focus on NU, and other Islamic group like LDII maybe focus on their own community. So that's why they are still fragmented. So as I said, to enhance this, there need to be a consolidation and collaboration among these Islamic movement, and also with other religious groups, with inter-religious collaboration. I think it's important because, like, for example, in Catholic, Laudato Si, we care with our home. Home here, our earth. So home is one, so whatever your religions, the home, the earth is still the same. So yeah, interreligious collaboration also important to enhance the roles of a faith community in responding to the issues of climate change. And the other challenge is because this movement often focus on their own constituents or even focus on their members. So there's still challenge to socialize this movement into a broader context of the common populations. Like, and also in our survey, in our national survey, many of Muslim population, they do not really know what the green is. We do not use the term Green Islam, of course, but we use several activities that this movement are doing, but many of Muslim population in Indonesia still don't know and don't familiar with these activities. So that's why it's important to expanding the issues or the movement into more broader context of the society in general. Hope I answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor A.M. Well, one of the, I think, main arguments that, if you read carefully Lynn White's thesis, is that the ecological crisis was preceded by the theological crisis, right? Meaning to say that many, in this case, the Christians got it wrong, right? In terms of their reading of the Bible, in terms of their reading of Genesis and Matthew's, more specifically on how humans were given the power to dominate the world and creation, essentially. So that was Lynn White's main sort of thesis. But this goes beyond Christianity. I mean, if you look at the work of Prasenjit Singh, for instance, he talks about this challenge of global modernity. And he talks about the crisis of transcendence. And this goes across all of the monotheistic religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and other. But he did mention that there was in these religions particular traditions and forms of spiritualities and practices of spirituality, like Sufism in Islam, Vedanta in Hinduism, Zen in Buddhism, which are much more related, which are much more connected to this idea about, the earth, about the spiritual connections with nature, with culture, which you don't find in the more sort of formalistic forms of organized religions, especially the monotheistic religions. You see, and this is what Syed Hussein Nasr calls since the 1960s about this externalization of knowledge, that our intrinsic knowledge of creation, of nature, has been externalized. So there is no more that perennial wisdom, there is no more that intrinsic knowledge of who we are and what we are doing in this planet, right? And so you've got this externalization of knowledge, but you also have this desacralization of nature as a result of this loss of spiritual meaning and internalization of knowledge, yeah, or the intrinsic knowledge and spiritual realities. Okay, any other questions or comments, final ones? Okay, we have Mas Ubed here, who's a PhD candidate from Iran. And anybody else? Okay, and then I'll have Paul Martin add a few lines. Yes, go ahead, Mas Ubed.
Well, thank you, Pak Diki. I think this is a simple question. My question goes to my sister, Prof. Im. You mentioned about the differentiation about the...
Closer to the mic, please.
Okay. Okay, directly, so what are the theological basis or jurisprudence of both Muhammadiyah and NU and other religious affiliations in doing what you call Green Islam? So you just mentioned about the focus, their focus, which is I think different there. So would you please to explore more about the comparatively in short? Thank you.
Yeah, even though they are Muslim, Islam, but again they have a different theoretical basis. Like based on our study, like among the Muhammadiyah, they tend to focus more human being is the center of everything. So their activities to protect environment actually will refer back to the human benefit. So the issues of anthropocentric perspective is still very dominant among Muhammadiyah. It's also confirmed, that's based on our qualitative study. It's also confirmed with our national survey. So we try to measure the level of anthropocentrism perspective, ecocentrism and theocentrism perspective among Muslim communities. And again, the finding shows that among Muhammadiyah, Muslim affiliated to Muhammadiyah, they tend to have more anthropocentric perspective higher than other Muslim group, either affiliated to NU or other Islamic groups. But some of the community also focus on what's so-called theocentrism, so how the relationship between human and nature is really depends on the God or theological God is very important. And actually, among the Muslim community, when we did the survey, the level of theocentrism among Muslim community is lower, the lowest one, compared to those who have the perspective anthropocentric and also ecocentrism. But if we compare among religious group, Muslim are among those with the highest level of theocentrism. I think the concept of Tawhid, the role of the importance of gods in Muslim society shape the way they see the environment and the relationship with the human being. So yeah, Tawhid is very important among these religious groups in constructing their perspective on the natures. Hope it's answering your question.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And my only worry, and something we haven't mentioned yet, but my only worry about the conversation we've had is that if we're worried about anthropocentrism and its difficulties, I think we're in for a world of hurt when we recognize that we're already in a world of technocentrism. Social media has displaced us from our local communities and our local world in ways that we're beginning to just realize, but AI is going to do this infinitely faster and infinitely further. So that's all to say that this conversation is not near over, and it's going to get even more difficult.
Thank you very much, Paul. And with that, I would like to close this seminar, and I'd like to please invite all of you to give a round of applause to our speakers. Yeah? Okay, so thank you very much. I think I will now leave the event to be given back to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Diki Sofyan. Thank you to all the speakers for the insightful speeches and discussions. Maybe once again we can give them applause. Special thanks to Bapak Diki Sofyan, PhD, our moderator, for leading the engaging session. And before we proceed further, we would like to take a moment to express our heartfelt gratitude to all the speakers and our moderator. We kindly invite the speakers here, Dr. Paul Martin and Professor Iim Halimatus Sa'diah, and our moderator, Dr. Diki Sofyan, to come forward. And please, Bapak Dr. Fahrudin Mangunjaya to come forward also to give some souvenirs as our appreciation.
Dr. Paul here. Paul. Yang foto.
Untuk Profesor Iip. Sudah? Next, untuk Bapak Dr. Diki Sofyan. Ya. Sudah? Oh, take a picture together. Yeah, thank you very much to our speakers, Dr. Paul Martin and Professor Im Halimatus Sa'diah, and also Dr. Diki Sofyan as a moderator. And for Professor Dr. Dato Azizan Baharudin, we will send you the souvenirs to Malaysia. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of today's seminar. Once again, I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude for our speakers, moderator, our esteemed guests, and all participants for attending and contributing to this event. We hope that this seminar has provided valuable insights and inspirations for everyone. See you at our future events and have a wonderful day ahead. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Mohon izin Bapak Ibu, bagi Bapak Ibu yang ingin mendapatkan materi di banner ini kita ada barcode, dipersilakan untuk scan barcode itu. Terima kasih.
Romanya udah diculik sama saya nih. Ayo Pak Farudin. Sini aja sini. Ini backgroundnya yang
Oh.